Welcome back to the Stephen A. Smith Show. Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit indirectly, it involves...
I grew up playing the basketball with the boys, so like it's always been physical and feisty, and like that's what it is, and you got to find a way to hold.
The room went silent, not the comfortable kind of silence, but the suffocating, heavy kind that makes your chest tight. When the final roster for the United States women's Olympic basketball team dropped, it wasn't the 12 names that made headlines. It was the one name missing. Caitlin Clark, the phenomenon who had single-handedly dragged women's basketball into the spotlight, selling out arenas that had collected dust for decades, was left off the team. And Stephen A. Smith just confirmed what we all feared. She didn't just get snubbed. She broke down. This wasn't about basketball. This was personal, calculated, and exposed the ugliest side of professional sports. Let's rewind. Caitlin Clark arrived in the WNBA like a Category 5 hurricane. Fresh out of Iowa, this 22-year-old wasn't just good. She was appointment television. Her games were pulling bigger numbers than NBA playoff matchups. Arenas that used to echo with emptiness were packed wall to wall. She was the golden ticket, the crossover star the league had desperately needed for years. So when Team USA announced their Olympic roster without her, the internet didn't just react. It detonated. Fans couldn't understand it. Analysts were baffled. And Stephen A. Smith, he went to war. Smith didn't tiptoe around this. He stood in front of national television cameras and called it exactly what it was, a push out. Not a close call, not a tough decision, a deliberate, premeditated move by the old guard to remind the new star that she didn't belong in their club yet. The official explanation was laughable. They said it was about experience, about chemistry, about paying dues. But Smith pulled up the receipts. At the time of the decision, Clark was leading the entire league in assists. She was top 5 in scoring. She was doing things as a rookie that veterans with a decade of experience had never touched. The idea that she couldn't contribute to a team that historically blows out opponents by 30 points? Insulting. Even if she rode the bench the entire tournament, her presence alone would have been worth more for the sport's global visibility than every other player combined. But here's where it gets darker. This wasn't just bad basketball management. This was a marketing catastrophe wrapped in jealousy and tied with ego. Professional sports are business, and the WNBA forgot that. When the NBA assembled the dream team in 1992, they didn't just pick the best players. They picked icons. They understood that the Olympics was the world's biggest commercial for their product. The WNBA had that same opportunity handed to them on a silver platter, and they threw it in the trash. You have a player who transcends the sport, a generational talent with millions of eyes glued to her every move, and you hide her, you leave her in Indiana while the world tunes into Paris? Stephen A. Smith screamed it from the rooftops. Stupid. That's the word he used. Stupid, because it prioritized the comfort of veterans over capitalizing on a once-in-a-lifetime cultural moment. It cost the league millions in potential revenue, sponsorships, and a global audience that was ready to fall in love with women's basketball. So why? Why would a league actively sabotage its own growth? That's where the story gets ugly. For months leading up to the Olympic decision, there was a pattern, a disturbing, undeniable pattern of hostility directed at Caitlin Clark that had nothing to do with competition. It started with the comments. Diana Taurasi, the legend and face of the old guard, went on television and delivered what sounded like a warning. She told Clark that reality was coming. At the time, people thought it was just veteran wisdom. Looking back now, it feels more like a threat, like a mob boss telling someone to watch their back. That interview set the tone. It gave everyone in the league permission to let their resentment bubble to the surface. Then came the physical toll. Kennedy Carter hip-checked Clark to the floor during an inbound play. It had nothing to do with basketball and everything to do with sending a message. Angel Reese celebrated hard fouls like they were championship-winning plays. Night after night, Clark was getting hammered, scratched, and targeted with very little protection from the referees. An Olympic snub? That was the ultimate extension of the hazing. The establishment was saying, we can't stop you from dominating on the court, but we can stop you from sitting at our table. The selection committee was filled with their friends, their former coaches, their peers. The chemistry excuse wasn't about basketball fit. It was code for we don't want her here. Here's the part that Stephen A. Smith really drove home. The veterans were terrified of the Caitlin circus. Imagine the scene in Paris. Team USA steps off the plane and the media descends like locusts. But every Every single microphone, every camera, every reporter is asking for Caitlin. The legends of the game, Brianna Stewart, Aya Wilson, Diana Taurasi, would have been reduced to background characters in their own movie. Reports came out that the veterans didn't want to deal with that. They wanted their moment. They wanted the spotlight on the team, which was really just a polite way of saying they wanted the spotlight on themselves. So they pushed her out to protect their egos, prioritizing personal comfort over the growth of a game that pays their salaries. And Caitlin Clark, she's human. For 2 straight years, she hasn't had a moment to breathe. From the madness of the NCAA tournament to getting drafted to diving straight into the WNBA grind. She's been under a microscope that would shatter most people. She's been called the savior, the villain, the target, the obsession. She's been fighting a war on 2 fronts. On one side, opponents who wanted to embarrass her. On the other, a league establishment that seemed reluctant to embrace her. The Olympic snub was the breaking point. It was a public rejection from the highest authority in her sport. It told her that no matter how well she performed, no matter how many seats she filled, she was still an outsider. Insiders whispered that she was privately devastated. Of course she was. Every athlete dreams of Olympic gold. But there was also relief. And here's where the plot twists in the most ironic way possible. By pushing her out, the WNBA accidentally did Caitlin Clark the biggest favor of her career. They forced her to take a 3-week vacation in the middle of a brutal season. While the veterans were in Paris, sleeping in cardboard beds and grinding through tight games against France, Clark was healing. She was away from the cameras. She was clearing her mind. She was resting her body. Stephen A. Smith called it the biggest backfire in WNBA history. They wanted to humble her. Instead, they recharged her. They gave their biggest threat the one thing she desperately needed but couldn't buy: rest. The financial fallout proved everything Smith had been screaming about. The Olympic ratings were fine. They were good, but they weren't Clark good. The gold medal game pulled significantly lower viewership than a random Friday night Indiana Fever game. Let that sink in. The pinnacle of international basketball, the game for gold, drew fewer eyes than a regular season matchup featuring the rookie they left at home. NBC executives were reportedly furious behind the scenes. They had paid billions for Olympic broadcasting rights, and the one athlete who could have delivered massive viewership numbers was sitting on her couch. It was a catastrophic missed opportunity. It was like owning a Ferrari and choosing to drive a Honda Civic to prom because the Civic has more experience. Then there's the inside job theory, and it's not even a theory anymore. The selection committee had deep ties to the Yukon and Gino Arima dynasty and the established WNBA power structure. Caitlin Clark, coming out of Iowa, was an outsider to that clique. People started calling it the Yukon Mafia. Players with objectively worse statistics, but the right pedigree made the team over Clark. Stephen A. Smith exposed this nepotism ruthlessly. He called it what it was: a club. In women's basketball, politics often matter more than production. If you're not part of the inner circle, you have to work twice as hard to get half the respect. The decision also fractured the fan base in a way that's still damaging the league today. Millions of new fans who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives started tuning in solely because of Caitlin Clark. When the league told those fans that the player they loved wasn't good enough, they took it personally. They saw the WNBA as elitist and unwelcoming. It created a civil war. Purists defended the veterans. The new wave defended Clark. And civil wars are never good for business. Stephen A. Smith placed the blame for this disaster squarely at the feet of the selection committee. The chemistry argument, Smith dismantled it in seconds. Great players figured it out. LeBron and Kobe figured it out. Durant and Curry figured it out. The idea that Caitlin Clark, one of the highest basketball IQ players in history, couldn't figure out how to pass the ball to Aya Wilson is not just wrong. It's insulting. The excuse implied that her style, the fast pace, the deep threes, the high-risk plays, was somehow wrong for international basketball. But her style is the future. By rejecting her, Team USA rejected evolution in favor of tradition. It was conservative. It was fearful. It was a mistake. When Clark returned to the court after the Olympic break, she looked like a completely different player. The hesitation was gone. The fatigue was gone. She started dropping double-doubles like clockwork. She shattered the single-season assist record. She demolished the rookie scoring record. She led the Indiana Fever to the playoffs for the first time in nearly a decade. Stephen A. Smith's vindication was sweet. He had been saying it all along. The time off that the league forced upon her was exactly what she needed to come back and dominate. The veterans who went to Paris came back sluggish and tired. Clark came back fresh. The push-out didn't humble her. It created a monster. Meanwhile, certain segments of the media spent months rooting against her. Pundits claimed she wouldn't translate to the professional level. Former players turned analysts refused to give her credit. Stephen A. Smith stood in the breach and defended her, not just as a player, but as an economic force. He called out the hypocrisy of women supporting women only when it fits a specific narrative. He asked the uncomfortable questions. Why is there so much animosity toward the person bringing everyone more money? Why the bitterness? His coverage didn't just defend Clark. It humanized her. It reminded people that behind the highlight reels and the Nike commercials, there's a young woman carrying the weight of the world while being rejected by her idols. Reports surfaced that the decision was essentially predetermined. Clark was never really given a fair shot. The training camp invites, the so-called monitoring of her play, it was all theater. They knew from the beginning they weren't taking her. They knew it would cause a firestorm, and they did it anyway. That level of arrogance is what infuriated Stephen A. Smith the most. They believed the USA basketball brand was strong enough to survive the backlash. They underestimated the Caitlin Clark effect. They underestimated how fiercely protective her fan base is. They thought the controversy would fade in a week. Instead, it became the defining story of the entire summer. Let's talk about the jealousy, because it's real and it's ugly. You have players who have been grinding in obscurity for years. Flying coach, playing overseas in Russia during the off-season just to make ends meet. Then a rookie walks in with a $28 million Nike deal and private jets before she plays a single professional game. Of course, feelings get hurt. Stephen A. Smith acknowledged that. He said it's human nature, but he also said it's unprofessional. You cannot let personal feelings dictate the trajectory of an entire league. The veterans acted like gatekeepers protecting their territory, failing to realize that Clark wasn't trying to take anything. She was trying to expand the territory for everyone. By pushing her out, they tried to slow down a train that had already left the station. And that breakdown in the relationship between the old guard and the new wave, that's the biggest threat to the WNBA's future. The 2024 Olympic team won gold. Yes, but they'll always be remembered with an asterisk. They'll be the team that was afraid of the rookie, the team that chose safety over stardom. And Caitlin Clark, she came out of it looking like a martyr. The snub validated her underdog status. It gave her a chip on her shoulder the size of Paris. It gave her fans a reason to rally even harder. Stephen A. Smith's confirmation of the breakdown and the push-out solidified this moment in history. It wasn't a basketball decision. It was a power play, and like most power plays fueled by ego, it backfired spectacularly. This is a cautionary tale about what happens when institutions resist change. The WNBA had the golden ticket. They had their Tiger Woods, their Michael Jordan, their Serena Williams, ready to step onto the biggest stage in sports. And they slammed the door in her face. Stephen A. Smith was the voice of reason in a sea of insanity, confirming what millions already knew. Yes, she was pushed out, and yes, she broke down, but she didn't stay down. She came back stronger, angrier, and more unstoppable than ever. The league tried to humble her. Instead, they built a legend.